to. I don't even know what that
They're
is.
both- yeah,
Can you
they're
hear
both
me?
on. Yeah, I just
Am I
want
on?
to make sure they're both on. I didn't
And
even check.
because we might as well just probably roll right with what we're doing.
Yeah.
Back to
Now it's been
we
a
have
while.
no idea what episode we're on. We're on an episode
14 or 15.
This is an episode, and we haven't been here for a while. And since we were last here, though, that was when you went on your sailing trip, right?
Yeah, we went sailing for a couple days, like to refresh, train, and see how Ren liked it.
And so let's go backwards here. So instead of talking about the second coming yet,
We'll talk about the first coming.
we'll talk about the. Well, we need to talk about the
Is
first
there a
coming.
first coming?
Because what is well?
I don't know.
Yes, there is a first coming, and we're going to get there. But first, your sailing trip. So, how was that?
It was good. I mean, it's so funny. It's interesting because that's like our fantasy retirement plan, and I don't know if it's the thing that we're going to do. We're just interested in it. And I don't know. It's one of those things I don't even know how we got interested. I don't remember.
Right.
Because we didn't grow up sailing. We didn't have that. But I think like a lot of people, maybe during COVID, we just sort of said, isn't there another way to do this?
Yeah.
Life thing? Like, how do we get out of the rat race? And how do you minimize the influence of the world? Like, And sailing's cool because, you get away from things like Wi-Fi and regular grocery shopping even. And, yeah.
So I'll play devil's advocate here, just because that's fun. So is that a kind of escape fantasy?
I mean, I think in a lot of ways it serves that purpose, but I think not primarily. I mean, I think the primary reason we want is because we want to get out of the habits and attachments that we have now, but you can't just stop. They're still there. You're still surrounded. You're still in the machine, right? And so it seems like it would be easier to shun some of those domestications by making it impossible to get to them. Like if you're an addict, don't keep drugs in the house.
Yeah. Well,
I've got internet.
food-wise, right? Yeah, don't keep M&Ms in the house. You want to stop eating M&Ms and drinking Diet Coke.
Which is funny because...
Don't buy them.
Yeah, because Kathleen continues to buy candy and she bakes, so there's always sweets in the house. But yeah, so that's the theory is like minimalism really more than escape fantasy. But part of it is because it gives us something to do, like because we know nothing's going to change until Eliza graduates. We're here, and so
And Eliza's
to think
in
about
what
it.
grade now, by the way?
she's whatever 10th grade is.
10th.
Sophomore. No, she's in 11th grade.
She's in 11th
So she
now.
has 2 more years, including the one that she's in. Yeah.
So I
hard to-
want to get this quick story in. I saw Eliza. I was
That's
in
right.
line
She just mentioned that.
at a coffee shop, which will remain nameless, but it sounds like Starbucks.
Unless they become a sponsor.
So I was in line at Starbucks, and I had my earbuds in, and so there's these two, probably actually I thought they were like college age, girls standing in front of me, and I never know almost how to be. Like I try not to stare at people,
Yeah.
Particularly like women in line.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I just kind of have my head down, looking at my phone, and I hear her start talking about, oh, my dad's set up, and there's big 2 lights, and they do a podcast, and I'm like, do I know this person?
That sounds like me.
And then I hear her say like, yeah, he called it. She's talking about your podcast now. Knowledge plus experience equals wisdom. I was like, are you one of Chris's daughters? And she was like, yeah, and I was like,
could I not be?
Are you home for college? And she's like, no, I'm still in high school. I was like, oh, well. And
sure
but it was just
right.
awesome. I mean, I just appreciated her, like, because a lot of kids wouldn't say anything, probably.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
I
was very impressed with that. So it made me. And then she said she'd like to be on the show. So we have.
Yeah,
we keep talking about having guests. So maybe.
She would be an interesting one.
Yeah.
Because she's an interesting kid. But it's funny because then she, I guess, ran into a whole bunch of people, and a whole bunch of people got involved in a tertiary conversation, if not that one, and talked about wanting to be on the podcast. And it's like, you don't know what it is. What you're saying is you want to be on somebody's podcast. Easy.
Might have to cut that one out. I apologize.
Well, no, it happens. I've heard that on a lot of like regular commercial podcasts, like coughing right into the microphone, where it's like, ow! How come they didn't edit that out?
Well, it would be interesting just to see almost like, well, what do you want to talk about?
Yeah.
You know, I was just start talking with them, and
Yeah.
and maybe that's something to do. So,
many
so anyways,
ideas.
so back to you're on the sailing trip, and you're here until Eliza at least graduates high school, so year and a half.
Yeah. And who knows? I mean, that's just the
That would be the earliest.
Yeah, the moment beyond which we could actually do something different.
Yeah.
And, the big conversation I always have with Kathleen is, because I don't know the answer to this, and I'm always devil's advocate. I'm like, what is it that you want to change? And do you think in changing that, it's the grass is greener thing, right? Mm-hmm. Is it going to do anything? And what what can we be doing now to sort of address those? And so I've been doing it all. Like I started regular exercise routine. I still do the 21-15 nights.
Nice.
I mean, for I don't know, a year. Yeah, and I gave up nicotine a few years ago. I'm taking, all the things that I can change, meditate more often, journaling, all these things that I can do. But I still sit around and I'm feel this, and I got rid of all social media, but I still feel the pull of my phone and just the internet and Google and just what am I doing?
Yeah.
Why? I could be doing whatever it is I think I'm going to be doing after Eliza graduates now.
Right.
And so I told her, it's we're just, you're going to be miserable here or miserable at your job or whatever it is that's driving you to change something. It's just going to be on a boat.
Right.
So that's the fear. And I don't know, I guess everybody sort of experiences that probably to some degree.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, gosh, dude, pretty much I think that's the point of my whole book.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah, finding
is
the peace or calm or
right
whatever.
is right, and it's so to me the one. So I would in my book, specifically I call that destination addiction, which I did not come up with the term. Somebody else came up with that term, but that's what it is.
There's another thing called arrival fallacy, where you think if you get to the destination, once you arrive at it, everything's going to be different.
Right. Yeah. Right. And grass is greener, arrival fallacy, destination addiction, they're all so closely related that they're the same thing.
Yeah.
Which, of course, is important just to acknowledge because we talk about that all the time, that somebody might say something slightly different, but it's if it's not identical, it's so close that it's the same thing. And I think we have to talk about that.
No, it's the lumbers and splitters thing, too. It's why would you choose to look at something so similar as being different? Who does that? But people do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's programmed into us like cultural conditioning, because you're kind of raised your way. I don't know if I ever said this. I probably did sometime on the podcast. So, when I was young, Captain Kangaroo was on TV. And then on Captain Kangaroo, there was a character, Mr. Green Jeans, right? And Mr. Green Jeans, in my mind, was kind of like this not necessarily an outdoorsman, but outside, country kind of guy, working outside in his garden or whatever, Mr. Green Jeans, right? Well, my neighbor was older gentleman, I'm guessing probably, 60s, probably when I was a kid, 60s or 70s, honestly, then. Yeah. And so he was retired and he worked out in his
probably
yard
had a gardening hobby.
And he was out gardening and using the rototiller, and they had a big patch of raspberries, which, of course, I've grown raspberries in my yard because I still think about that all the time. I would love to go over there. And then, of course, his wife would come down and, yell at me when I was eating them. And, but, mostly out of fun, not, super mad. But at the same time, she didn't want this little kid eating all the raspberries. And I could put some away.
Yeah, right. Sure.
But so to me, he was Mr. Green Jeans. And I was like, well, you have a Mr. Green Jeans in your life. Right. That's what you have. So this is a thing. So whatever you grow up, that's what you kind of think is right. So, for example, when I think this is one that a lot of people can understand. When I was a kid, probably up until I was 7 years old, we had a dog. We didn't have it my entire life to 7. But anyways, we had this dog that was my mom's, and she lived at my grandmother's, and then came back to our house. Anyways, at the time, that dog slept in the garage. Now, it was a carpet and kind of a bed thing and stuff, and the garage was right off the house, so it was pretty warm and stuff. But I don't recall that dog ever being in the house,
right.
Right. And now, of course, my dogs are sleeping in my bed. They have their own bed in the house. They eat inside. They spend most of their time inside, as do your dogs, right?
Yeah.
And that's pretty common. And, for a lot of people, though, if you were raised in a state where you believe that the dog should be outside only.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, and I don't know where. You know, I never questioned that until I had my own dog and was like, well, I'm bringing it in the house.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting.
It's just the way it was.
'Cause,
your dog slept outside. That's what happened.
Yeah.
You know, and you don't question that. And even my mom now is like, I can't believe I let that dog sleep out in the garage.
Well, that's really interesting because sometimes I wonder if why I didn't not question. I questioned everything. Like my parents had a dog for a minute, and they kept it not only outside but as far away from the house as you could get it, tied up to a runner. Mm-hmm. That was the extent of its entire life.
Yep.
And at some point, I think they realized we didn't really want a dog anyway, and they got rid of it. It just disappeared.
Yeah, just
so that's
right. What did that even mean?
But when I decided I wanted to get a dog, I just was like, oh, well, how do I want to do this without the influence of that? Or maybe I was reacting oppositely. You know, I think I parent like that. I think I parent the opposite of the way that I see. You know what I mean? Like, well, I perceived this as being wrong when I experienced it, and so now that I'm going to do it, I'm going to take a 180.
Yeah.
On whatever that was. To do
right.
that.
Right.
So
yeah.
maybe.
Which, and of course, sometimes I think we have to be really careful with that. And that's probably where we create some of our problems because.
Well, yeah, helicopter parenting really came out
right.
of that.
Which is largely like our generation created that.
Right. Because of the latchkey, sort of children should be seen and not heard. And a lot of us didn't like that. So, voila.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, I don't know how that relates to.
Well, we're just talking about where you're going with the idea of going sailing, and is it what is it actually accomplishing?
Yeah, and what is it that you really are trying to accomplish? Right. You don't even really know. You just sort of, and so maybe this like opposition thing is the basic way that we change, right, or that we pursue new things. It's like I always learned, while we're finding out who we are, as Maslow's hierarchy of needs are sort of the evolution of the personality. When you're a kid, you think you're your mom.
Mm-hmm.
You literally don't differentiate yourself from your mom or your primary caregiver until you're like 2.
Sure,
and
that's
then you start to
an actual step of development.
Yeah, developmental
that is something
stages.
we do. Yes.
And so as a teenager, I've always thought you're figuring out who you are by saying, "Oh, I'm not that. Ooh, I don't like that. I'm not that. Okay, I'm not that." That's the process of sort of like oppositional reactivity or something. I'm sure there's a name for it. And so what we're doing is going. We've gotten to a point where we have some choices about our lives, and it's like, well, what doesn't work and what does work? Some people may go, I don't think this couch looks good in the living room, so I'm going to get a different one. But we're going, I don't, want to be around mass consumerism, or I want to figure out a way to help people that doesn't seem to be available here, or I don't even know, like. I'm tired of being constrained by having to drive everywhere. Whatever it is, like change the elements of your community that you perceive to be less than satisfying, less than favorable. Yeah,
and of course, I mean, it's so difficult on the grand level because the systems now are so ingrained in us, really. You know what I mean? And we're so ingrained in them. Mm-hmm. That it's just so hard to separate yourself out. And then I find myself a lot like, well, I mean, if I need to play the game of having a car, I do like having a nice car that I can count on.
Yeah, exactly.
To the best of my ability.
Totally.
And then when you think about it in these terms, like, it's, you have kids. It's one thing if your car breaks down and you're dealing with yourself.
Exactly
man, if you have a kid with you,
exactly.
It's a level of concern, on top of that. So you want that reliable transportation kind of thing. And then of course, with the price of things, you're so caught in. What are you going to do? Like it costs this much.
Exactly. You get, and that's why I think changing the scene is so critical. It's hard to change some things because they are such a critical part of, I don't even know, the machine, the culture, the way that we do things. You don't have a choice.
Right.
I mean, you don't have a,
Yeah, it's really difficult to break out of the cultural conditioning, the cultural systems that we're in. I mean, I think that's actually a little bit of a good lead-in
Yeah, it
though,
is.
to
I
the
can see
second coming, because I
link.
think a lot of people think that the second coming is this magical state that's going to occur where everything is okay all of a sudden,
Right.
right? And all the problems are fixed.
Well, that's it. Yeah, that's interesting because it's either that or mass destruction. Like what's the word? Like
Armageddon.
yeah, like the Hunger Games or
Yeah.
whatever they called. What is dystopic? Some dystopia. It's either utopia or dystopia though. And you talk about that a lot. Like, why would there be a heaven? But I mean, maybe you can. Is that where you're going? Where you're going to talk about that?
Well,
Like,
I mean,
sort of-
yeah, I mean that would be related. I mean, so I think so with the idea of the second coming, a lot of the interpretations would be that like we have to have the destruction first, the Armageddon,
Yeah.
to get to the
right.
to the
You got to
second
get
coming.
rid of the sinners or whatever.
Some people believe literally that, quite literally, they believe that you better be looking up because Jesus is going to come down through the clouds. And then, those who have not accepted him will not be going with him, and you're not going to ascend bodily into heaven, literally. And of course, so one of the problems with all that is that it's the interpretation of it is where the problem roots.
Yeah.
It's trying to read these things literally, right?
Into
And so
a
they're
metaphor.
written 2,000 years ago. And here's what's interesting about that, though, right? Is they're written 2,000 years ago. And so typically there's like three kind of main ones they talk about. And I'm not a biblical scholar, so I'm not trying to pretend that I am. But there's something like in Isaiah, there's something that Jesus says, period. And then there's something that Paul talks about, right? So this is probably 2,700 years ago, maybe for Isaiah, or 2,500 years ago to Jesus. Now it's 2022, so we're talking, about 2,000 years ago for him and Paul. For Jesus, the idea that Jesus, whatever Jesus said and whatever Paul said, which would have been after Jesus said it, right? Okay, in theory. All right, now, and they probably did say something, right? A person said this. But so they thought the second coming was imminent then, like it's coming very soon then.
Oh, right.
So here we are, 2,000 years later, and it hasn't come yet. And I think there's there's several famous things like this. I think there was one called the Millerites. I want to say it's in the 1800s.
Yeah. It
that,
seems
again,
like it happens all the
They
time.
were all in, like it's coming right now, and it's coming.
Well,
Now,
and I tell you, just to
Yeah.
to make it timely. I mean, I the stuff that I read on Medium, where I sort of write and read a lot. There's a lot of this dystopic writing that's basically, they're not calling for a literal second coming right now, but they're saying between climate change, economic disaster, the housing crisis, homelessness, that whatever Armageddon it might be, whatever the dystopian version, is happening right now. It's coming.
Yeah.
It's going. That's it. It's the end of capitalism.
Yep.
Next year, better get ready.
Yeah,
So it's kind of the same
It's very closely
spirit
related.
of it's going to happen now. And so that what we were talking about earlier is my question was, have we done this forever?
Yes.
Like, was this like
have.
something that we just do?
And that's all the show is. So, hey, we've done this forever, and we keep doing it forever.
Well, no, but surely that's. I mean, because it's like everything. It's either me, like why for the last 10 years, 15 years have I not really been worried about this? Mm-hmm. Is it that I'm reading more about it, so it's whatever that is, recognition bias or whatever they call that, where you happen to see what you're looking for and think, oh, it's happening more often.
Confirmation bias,
confirmation.
right? Yeah.
Is it really happening more often? Am I just reading about it, or is there always some level of it running in the background that we're just not attaching ourselves to for whatever reason?
Okay, so I think you'll appreciate this, and you might be able to take what I'm going to start saying and kind of run with it. Because we have not been on the planet since the beginning of time. Okay, so one on the literal interpretation, they're going to argue with that. Okay,
Yeah, right.
And I can't help you if you want to argue with that. You're going to argue with that no matter what.
Yeah, because
Okay,
that just
fine.
becomes a time issue, though, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
time can be
So-
measured different ways.
So we, as a species of what we are now of humans, right? They have a definitive beginning. Now, when that exactly is, who cares?
We'll never know.
There's a definitive beginning, though. Okay, now, is it going to have a definitive end? Well, probably. And
Yeah.
it could be anytime. I mean, it could be today, or it could still be in, I don't know, 500,000
Yeah,
years.
and it could be a
Yeah.
gradual pattern where,
Right.
we'd
Gradually decline.
like
right.
the coelacanth. We thought
Yeah.
it was extinct forever. Whoop, it shows up in somebody's net.
And
I guess there are
and
still up there.
so what is it?
It's a fish, coelacanth.
fi-
It's
okay.
a bony. It's a fish with bony limbs, so it's an evolutionary link.
Okay.
Anyway,
And we thought it was gone.
yeah, that happens with a lot of things. There's I just read about something recently. The ivory-billed woodpecker. These things are showing back up. They're just rare.
They're
Sasquatch.
super rare. They're still exactly.
Loch Ness
Yes.
monster.
Yeah. They're still around.
That could be the fate of humans, or they could just be.
Right. Well, and of course, so I think most people think that it is the
And really, truthfully, like, from the biologist perspective, that doesn't really happen that often.
the
Yeah.
immediate
In
like
fact, I can't think of any. The passenger pigeon, the dodo, green sea turtles, almost, where we just went, hey, we can use this animal, and got them all. Like at once, literally at once, and then they're gone.
Right.
That happens a little bit. Anyway.
Right. Yeah. So it's uncommon that it's going. Now, of course, I mean, in theory, then with dinosaurs, right? It was a meteor and just wiped them all out. Done.
Right.
Okay. So that could happen to us anytime. Or perhaps the Death Star will appear out of nowhere in the sky.
Yeah.
And then
Suck
we'll
us
all
all
be done.
off with a tractor beam or something.
Right. Yeah, right. Maybe that's what the second coming is. The Death Star actually arrives and sucks us out. But yeah. So the odds of us becoming extinct all at one time and the Earth being destroyed, gone. I mean, it could happen.
But it's not, yeah, why would we default to that?
Well, right. And if it does, what are we going to do about it?
We won't even be aware of it.
And so, dude, I was thinking about this. And so, again, you might know more on this. If you get hit by lightning and die, I mean, some people survive lightning, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
My nephew survived it. He was in the shower.
okay.
Or cousin.
So, but I mean, if you get hit by lightning, do you and die, you're probably dead instantly. Like, you
Yeah.
don't think like, oh, I'm getting hit by lightning.
Or, yeah, there might be a split. I think about this a lot. There might be like a split instant where you're like, what?
Right.
That's
But it
about
would
it.
be so quick.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, in the grand scheme, if the Earth would go that way, well, it would be the same thing.
Yeah, it's like Dax Shepard said. But death, normal, like sudden death like that, not like gradual kind of cancer or suffering death. Most deaths probably, you don't even feel.
Yeah.
You're not even hurt. You don't even experience a loss. It's everybody else around you that
Right.
experiences the death. You don't.
Right.
So,
Yeah. So, so I think that's one interesting thing to think about, that we have thought this is going to happen for at least, I'm going to say 2,500
Yeah,
years.
I would say
at least
that's
2,500
a
years.
good number.
We've talked about this. And of course, to some point, the argument, we are closer now than we were then. For sure.
Yeah.
Because you
More
can't
time
not
has
be.
passed. Yeah.
No, you can't not
Unless
be.
we're measuring time wrong.
Right. Which, of course, is kind of arbitrary anyways. But so by the Earth standards of time, yes, we are closer now than ever.
It's becoming more and more.
But it still could be 500,000 years away. Yeah. Which then we are so, I mean, it's, and that's the thing, numbers are so big. I mean, when we think, if I think about the 1800s or the 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, you might see some photos, and of course it's black and white. And I think for a long time, in my mind, I was like, well, the world was black and white.
it sure
then.
was dark.
It's like,
yeah, it's dull.
no, it wasn't. You know what I mean?
Although I think
Like-
it kind of was more so, like clothing. Was probably
just
one
more
or two
neutral.
Yeah,
neutral thing. But flowers were still
right,
bright,
yeah.
and
Nature,
the
coral
sky
reefs
was
were still
blue. Yeah, right, and yeah, probably more colorful.
Yeah.
That is probably actually better. Here's a question for you. This is a complete side note here. Do you think, so we are in October here of 2022, so if you're watching this in 2072, it's a little while ago. Do you think
100.
right now that there is not quite as much color in the leaves as there was in the COVID year?
Well, yeah, I mean,
particular?
I think it's a pretty dry, dull year. I was thinking about that, how everything's sort of got a brown, it's got a more of a brown
hue instead of...
Yeah. There's a couple of nice colors, but yeah, I don't think the colors in
So, I mean, I guess my question is, do you think it's because we've amped back up to full carbon usage and doing everything?
I mean, I tend to blame it on water more than anything.
Okay.
It's been dry.
Interesting.
Like we had that super wet period, and then it was dry.
Yeah.
When it mattered, I think, but I don't really.
Yeah,
know.
I just wondered, if there's
Yeah, like that whole thing with deer. Deer were less threatening because people were driving less, and so they came out more during COVID. I mean,
Okay.
I tend to believe people saw more wildlife in urban areas during COVID because presumably because people weren't out as much, and that may be true, but we don't have any real. It's just fun to speculate, but without any evidence, I don't have any idea.
Right.
It's possible.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so sticking with the second coming, the question then is, what is the first coming?
Yeah, it never occurred to me to think about that. I mean, as far as I know it, and let me offer an ignorant point of view, is like Jesus died on the cross because God gave his only begotten son, and he came back from the death and was like, I'm awesome, I don't die, and I'm going to do it again. So was that the first coming?
I'm sure some people probably do think that. I would say that the first coming is just creation, period, that it's why we're here.
Right.
That's the actual answer.
That's cool. Well, that's cool.
Yeah,
because that makes this
that's the first
non-religious sort of.
Well, and I think the thing is, so even in like Eknath Eascharan, I might be butchering his name there, but he's one of my favorite meditators that does extemporaneous talks and has books, and he passed away I think in the late 1980s. He talks about within the Hindu scriptures that he grew up with that there is even a thought of like of a second coming. And of course that would be like related to Krishna. And again, so I think the first thing you have to kind of talk about is, and I've even seen it related in some Buddhist
that's interesting.
Some Buddhist, I want to say maybe Mahayana.
And I was thinking about this earlier, so just let me make sure I'm clear. So people who believe in reincarnation would also believe in the same.
Yeah, I mean, there's some connection, at least with some people's interpretations.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's interesting, because because reincarnation is definitely something that we need to kind of talk about.
Yeah, that seems to be. I mean, the second coming would be this is the one reincarnation.
Yeah.
But if you're a culture that believes in it all the time, then so what's the big deal?
Yeah, right. So, and then of course it kind of gets into that definition of what exactly is reincarnation.
Right.
And so it's easy, I think, for somebody in this country, which is, largely Christian based, and a lot of people were raised Christian in this country, to not understand reincarnation the way it would truly be understood. The same way that we could not understand, like our own text, basically. Because of a literal interpretation. Like we look at that, and we interpret that literally also, and because we're interpreting our text literally also. And of course, so two points is the literal interpretation of the scriptures of different religions, that does make them different. But when you get to I want to say a mystical meaning, there would be the apparent meaning, the literal meaning, apparently. There would be like a cultural meaning, maybe those are real close together, and then there'd be a mystical meaning. The mystical meaning is where they start merging down, to similarities. So then you have similarities across the board in the religions. And so that's, of course, then where we find unity within them instead of the division and separateness. And then the other thing is just starting with the word God and that idea is because it's almost like there's like an infinite way to think about God, but if you think about it just three ways, is there is a God, like this literal dude kind of person. It's the wizard and the Wizard of Oz behind it all, this one being, which largely in text gets identified as the male, right? Okay, so it has that male gender behind it. So there would be that. Then there would be a large group that would be just completely, as soon as they hear the word God, their mind shuts off. There's no God, there's not that. But then, of course, I mean, this is our kind of extremes, and I think it kind of comes down into this again. It's but they're whole, that there's no difference then. You can't divide the whole, It's always the whole, right? No matter what. It's indivisible, and that's the true understanding of God. Now, if you can't accept that, I can't help you.
Well, it's
I can't help you.
You're just in a different level of
Development.
yeah, development. I was
Yes.
gonna say, I don't want to put
Yeah.
a judgment on it.
So within the creation, we have to be able to experience the creation. So we're part of the whole, right?
Okay.
You're undeniably part of a whole.
Mhm.
Now you can call that whole anything you want. In my book, I call it the one big whole. But call it whatever you want. Call it God. That's fine.
Yeah.
Call it the great mystery.
Yeah.
You know, call it the Tao. Call it whatever you want. You're undeniably part of it. Now, in order for you to be part of it and to experience part of it, you have to have something that allows you to experience that. Otherwise, you're
Right,
just
right.
one big lump
Right,
of,
right.
yeah, you know. And so,
That's interesting.
for lack of a better term, I think the word ego is what that is. Because egos don't exist. They don't exist. You can't put your finger on an ego. You can't, okay, you can't do that. So the ego is what distinguishes us as a unique and separate being from all other
Separate-ish.
unique and separate beings.
Separate but still.
Yes, but separate but
Connected.
part of the. It's what distinguishes us from with
Well,
each
that's
one.
cool.
And so you have to have that in order to operate here in this physical realm. Okay, and that has nothing to do with whether there is a heaven or any kind of astral realm, physical realm, non-physical realm, afterlife here. Okay,
Right.
you have to have that ego here in order to operate and experience
Otherwise, you'd have no perception
right,
of anything.
what's
You
going
would
on.
just be it.
You would just
There would
be
be no
it.
perception.
Which is then again what God is, because a
Yeah.
lot of times you'll just say is, I mean, it's just being.
Yeah.
You know, it's it. Okay, so you have your ego. So then creation, because of creation in the physical realm, it requires the ego. It requires the ego, but simultaneously, you have to transcend the ego or get by the. You could think of it the end of the ego's rule, like the control of the ego on you. And so what the second coming is the end of the ego's rule, not the end of the ego necessarily,
That's
because
so
if the
cool.
ego ends, you're part back to the one
Well, and it's
whole,
like
and you are in that
Right,
unitive
right,
state.
right.
Yes.
you become aware of the fact that you are in the ego, and therefore it doesn't go away, but it loses its separateness
Right.
value, right?
Right.
Because now you know.
And
like,
so,
if you're-
to me, so there's a lot of different ways
that's pretty cool.
to get in this. Now, probably the best way to really, so a lot of people would have experienced a sense of unity with the world, right? With the universe. Sometimes like staring up at stars or something. It's
Yeah.
like you have a sense of unity, a sense of oneness, a sense of connection with everything, right? And that's of course it's so related to it.
Yeah,
Right, of what it is.
Well, it's probably an actual thing that is happening where, for whatever reason, your ego has become weak enough for you to see through the illusion of it and go, "Oh shit."
Right, right, and that's it exactly. The illusion, that's the perfect word there. Because it's all an illusion that we've created, you know. And then, so, of course, if you can learn to meditate and quiet your mind, and then there's literally, you
Yeah.
can look at like the delta waves of the mind, right? And
Yeah,
there's different
yeah,
stages
yeah,
of
sure.
meditation, right? That you're going to be in that. But also, you know, what I found is I could learn, or I learned, but you learn it, but then you practice it.
Right.
I learned to identify all the times that it was my ego talking, not the whole. Which, again, there's another one, just like the word God, comes in many flavors. Because it could be the Holy Spirit, it could be the still quiet voice,
Sure.
it can be anything you want it is. Some people say they hear it. Some people it just kind of comes out of it. You know what I mean? Like they don't hear it necessarily. Like they just have it. You know. And so when you are operating from that state, that's where you want to be. That's where you are ego free. That's the second coming. Okay.
Interesting.
But you still have to have the ego in order to experience this as a
Sure.
separate being.
Sure.
Because otherwise, what are you doing? You
Yeah.
know? And then again, for me, once I learned and then started practicing, is some of the big keys in my book is just remove the label from everything, because the label is not what it is. So when I'm driving down the road and I see a car that has, whatever, like a sports team, a political figure, a religious thing, you know what I mean? Do I identify them with that? That is just a label on that person. I might know the person, I might actually like the person, I don't know the person. The person is, for lack of a better term, a soul. And all of those other things, they are not.
Right.
They are not actually a Democrat. They are not actually a
Yeah,
Republican.
yeah, those are
They're,
all.
they're not things. Okay. So remove all the labels. And then also the same thing is, I mean, there's different levels of that because it could be like your boss. Well, the boss doesn't exist.
Yeah,
It's,
right.
it's
Another
still just a
label.
person.
Yeah.
It's just another label. Now, do we need some hierarchy structure like that sometimes? Yes, we do.
Yeah.
You know, and so I mean, we have to fit within that, but we still have to identify. If we,
Well,
we
yeah,
can
we-
tell in our mind where we're
Sometimes
operating
we
from.
need to differentiate.
Yes.
You know, we can't just, or we wouldn't be able to get anything done.
Right, right,
Meet
yeah,
our basic needs. This is fascinating, and it's cool how it links directly to sort of my wife and I's dilemma of you know, wanting less of it. Because the way I see what you're describing is various inventions within the illusion that strengthen the realness of the illusion and therefore weaken the connection to the one big whole, right? These are all necessary and maybe unnecessary constructs that keep us in the ego and keep us ignorant of the idea that there is anything but the ego. The more of these things that, and this is what's sort of irritating me, the more of these labels, the more of these constructs, these names that we attach ourselves to, the less of a chance we have of having those moments of clarity, of going, oh, look at the stars. You know,
Right.
somebody who's so worried about whatever, getting their emails done because they want a promotion at work, they might look up and go, yeah, that's cool. And because they have so much of that stuff maintaining their ego-ness.
right, yeah,
And that's what I'm getting at, I guess, to kind of link it back, is reducing those things to allow for more breathing room, which I think you said, you know, like within that,
yeah.
within the one big whole, just to be more present in it. Because wasn't that what it used to be like?
Well, I mean,
Probably most of our lives, or
yeah, right.
Homo
Well, how?
sapiens existence.
Well, probably then as culture grew and societies grew, right, from like tribes would have been very family based at first, right? I mean, it would have been the family
I suppose.
direct,
I mean,
you know, largely it probably came out that way, which of course then people realized that being together
They're
was
stronger
safer than
together.
being, yeah, stronger together, right? United we stand, divided we fall.
yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
I want to sort of complete.
Yeah.
I just realized the thought that I was having was that we're trying, we're aiming for Armageddon, or you know, the second coming. That's what we're trying, and I think that's the spirit of what we're trying to do, is get there, which I never would have thought like that until you described it that way, is to reduce all the stuff that's keeping us from releasing the ego, basically, while being aware of it still.
Right, right.
Which is
And I
really-
think the key there would be, it wouldn't be the Armageddon part of it.
Yeah, yeah, I
It's
mean,
not the
yeah,
destruction part, is typically the way that's viewed.
Yeah,
Is the second coming is when you're in that state. But now, so to me, to be, so, I mean, as the ego, can you achieve, so you could also think of that, it's very close or identical to enlightenment.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
right.
well,
Absolutely.
enlightenment is not a single state, and maybe it is after we pass away. Okay, but even anybody that would have ever been enlightened, and in our times, and some people hate him, some people love him, Eckhart Tolle, maybe.
I'm actually going
He's
back
still
and
here.
reading The Power of Now again.
Are you? But he's still
trying.
here right now.
Right?
For sure. So he still has to operate from both
Yeah.
states. Okay. And enlightenment, so enlightenment in this lifetime for sure is not an end state.
Yeah, right.
It's going on. It's
Well,
like education.
And I would call it's that when you reach the ability to be aware of your ego, then you're enlightened. Because now you have the capacity to go, what you were just describing earlier, to catch yourself. Is this my ego, or am I in a united mind sort of state? And then now I can make a decision. Well, I don't want to do this, then I'm going to try to do more of this,
Right.
which is the goal. And so it seems to me like being enlightened is not being trapped and wrapped up in the hamster wheel and being going, hey, wait, I'm on a hamster wheel.
Right.
You're enlightened.
Right.
Like, maybe that's as simple as it is.
Yeah,
Just having
and-
to-
But of course, like you're still going to
yeah, you
fail
fail
somebody.
right. Again, it doesn't mean it at all.
Yeah.
That might be the end of it. You might go, yep, I'm still going to choose
Yep.
to be a
Because-
drug addict.
and that's the
whatever.
chop wood, carry water thing, is because then you still have to
Totally.
participate. right? And that's
Yeah.
the thing. So it's not this magical state of bliss that we just get to sit around and I don't have to do anything.
And I guess
it makes
yeah.
everything okay.
And I guess I knew that, but I forget that
Yeah.
a lot of people do probably think that enlightenment is this mass, like the second coming. Because this is blowing my
Yeah.
mind. Like your
Yeah.
definition of the second coming is blowing my mind because it's much different than the weird assumptions that I had made, and now it opens up a whole nother.
Yeah.
There's a
It's-
lot of more connections, and yeah,
Right. And
makes more sense.
well, and it makes it so it works where we don't have to all be divided, right? And so as we develop our compassion, and I mean, in my prayer / meditation, quiet time, whatever you want to call it, every day, I mean, I think about or ask to be more compassionate in all situations because it's very difficult to do that all the time. But that's all you can do is practice it as a human, right? And you have new opportunity. Every day is a new opportunity. Every moment's a new opportunity.
Yeah, it's so true.
To demonstrate then that. And I think that's what's so important. And I think that's also where anybody that believes the second coming is simply that Jesus is going to come down through the clouds and
do whatever.
whether the different perceptions of that, and just save it. It's like,
that's awesome, man.
It's like, well, listen.
I missed that. Like I've just missed that in your book. I did not make that.
Well, I don't know even if my book is crystal clear on that.
Well, maybe
I should save that in book too.
Maybe it's up to the individual to sort of. But now, so to me, it's like you, like in your prayers and thoughts and quiet time. Like what I find myself wishing for is for more people to, spontaneously or through their own free will, recognize the difference in sort of the one big whole, the unit of mind, ego choices that we make on a day-to-day basis, and that something like divisiveness is a less desirable choice, and just to sort of have that moment for themselves where they can see that. Like I want that for other people because that's the beginning.
Yep.
You can't go up to somebody and be like,
right.
You're doing this wrong. I have no interest in judging people or changing, having any. I call it moving the turtle. Like a lot of times, if I'm driving down the highway and I see a turtle in the road, I resist the urge to get out and move the turtle out of the road. As much as I love, especially box turtles, I love them, but it's not my place. Like, what gives me what am I the?
You're not
turtle
here to
mover?
save the world.
How do I know that there's not a turtle-eating predator right where I'm going to put the turtle, and I basically move it, and he's going to get across the road fine by themselves anyway. And so I would never try to impose my beliefs, but for somebody, I think it's okay to wish for somebody to have one of these, like, I don't even know, you described it pretty good earlier, these epiphanal moments, whether you're meditating or, at a sports event or like listening to music or looking at the stars, I think is the one you said. The more of that can happen, the more likely it is that we will progress as a species.
Right.
And the less that it happens, the more I see this whole thing that I'm trying to get away from.
Right. Yeah.
happening.
Well, I think it's important to look at from the perspective of thinking that Jesus is literally going to come down between the clouds and save us all. The second coming, that's what the second coming is, and everything's going to be all right. Well, that idea has been around, again, for at least 2,500 years. People thought it then, too. They weren't writing it then saying it's going to be 2,500 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
They thought it was then. Okay. Well, either which way, how has that helped anything?
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like the definition of insanity, right? You keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. We keep doing that. So somehow we have to get completely out of the box. You have to break the way you're thinking, or you could say you have to reverse your thinking, and it's hard, but that's exactly.
Well, that's what's happened. I think that's what's happened for me.
Yes.
Today is my thinking of, and I didn't have a horse in that, or dog in that fight, or whatever they said.
Sure. Yeah.
I could have cared less what the second coming really meant. It
Right.
didn't have any. I don't feel like I'm going to live or die or go to hell or heaven or none of it. I'm completely removed, like the non-biased narrator, right? The omniscient point of view. But I did have an assumption about that people thought it meant what you are describing, that God would come down and go, okay, everybody, I
Yeah.
flipped the switch and now things are different and the sinners
Right.
are gone, whatever.
Sinners are gone, yeah.
And so I think what I would argue as a scientist is like you're saying, we've done the experiment for 2,500 years. There's zero evidence that our literal interpretation of this metaphor is correct. Therefore, we should open our minds to which we probably needed to have been doing the whole time, but open ourselves to alternative explanations. And for me, this is it.
Right.
This is the most sense it's ever made to me because it fits it back in with your book, the rest of the explanation of everything else. It's not like you're saying, oh, the second coming is when we turn into dolphins.
Right.
You know, it's not this
yeah,
like
right. Yeah.
It's
Spaghetti,
it fits in, and granted, it fits in with my worldview, but my worldview has resulted from a series of other experiments like this where I'm left with this makes the most sense.
Right.
And it fits right in the middle of all that. It's I would say it's genius and brilliant, but I feel like, it's not your brilliance that has allowed you to see it, it's your openness.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, because there's no brilliance.
Well, I mean, I think it's the same praise. I'm just, using the right word, is that you're just more connected to the sensical.
Open to the connection. Well, and so I had to challenge myself, and very specifically, where, and I mean, it was, of course, it was like a process for me, where I realized I challenged myself, and it was like, well, okay, I think I'm right about stuff. Well, they clearly think they're right about stuff too. Yeah. Okay.
Everybody
well,
thinks
where do we meet then? And it's like, so on one hand, it's like, okay, well, if everybody that thinks there's going to be a second coming, okay, and that's like the way to be. If everybody did all of a sudden, so they would tell you have to accept Christ to get into heaven. Okay. If that happened, everybody, all of a sudden, everybody did that. Okay, it just happened. Everybody just happened. Whatever, we're probably, I don't know if we're 8 billion yet, I'll have to look that up. But we're real close to 8 billion. Everybody that hasn't done that, everybody did that right now. Where are we?
Yeah, right. Well, at some point where we would be in about 5 minutes if somebody goes, I don't feel any different.
Yeah.
And then
and then we realize everything's exactly the same as where we're at right now.
So there's zero evidence.
Right. So we're right here, and we have to then change the way we are behaving collectively. And starting with those people need to change is not the way to go. That's not the way to go.
Right.
Because they can go, those people need to change, right? And then we're right where we are, where we have these like divisions. So somehow we have to flip the way we're thinking, or like reverse, however you want to say it, reverse our thinking into a different way. And then you see, and it doesn't just automatically solve problems. Like I can think that and I can understand that, but that doesn't make me good at understanding.
Right, you can understand it intellectually, but if you don't.
Well, but I can't help a specific problem because I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not experienced and educated in a specific problem. Like, so I can't. Well, as soon as I feel this way, well, I can fix any idea of global warming, and we can change from the combustion engine because I magically fix it. That doesn't fix that.
It's like the
you still need people with specific knowledge in each category.
Well, and it's probably like checks and balances, right? We don't really want one ego within the very big whole to be able to change it. It should be, consensus based.
Right.
And that's another that reminds me of sort of the idea of global value systems. And one of the global value systems, if people continue to believe that they can say fuck everybody and Trump is the God and that's the way I think, therefore that's everything, well, that's just not right.
Yeah.
By definition of being an individual of a species.
Right.
Like you cannot, no man is an island. I don't know how else you want to say that.
Yeah,
but there's a set of rules, and one of them being this consensus-based thing. No one individual can carte blanche change the whole system. That's not allowed. It's not, because, well, by the way you just described it, it's impossible.
Right.
Although, within the ego world, individuals can have massive influence over lots of other people, like Trump.
Sure.
But again, that would not jibe with. And maybe that's just wrong of me, but I still think there are 10 commandments that work across the board for all human beings. You know, it's just immediately.
Yeah, you need a producer. Okay, so what do you want to
Well, I
just
could,
hit on global value systems here?
well, maybe, but I want to reiterate that. I mean, you know, I've never really been to church. I've never like had dogmatic experiences outside of like reading about indigenous cultural beliefs and going, ooh, yeah, this lines up with sort of what I'm thinking. And so that's how I sort of arrived at, you know, just reading stuff and thinking and sort of a process of elimination, a scientific type approach. Like it's standardized. I'm not just going, yeah, but a dolphin was God, and so I need to like learn to breathe underwater. You know, I wasn't just making stuff up. It was a you know, a reason, a philosophical approach to thinking and organizing my thoughts, and it wasn't random. But I've never really, and I've had very few sort of those experiences, but something happened today when you defined defined the second coming as, you know, this, and I'll paraphrase and maybe you can correct me as a review of like recognizing that you are an ego and having that self-awareness of being separate from the one big whole, but not really, only as far as it is necessary, and then having a choice of deciding how much of your thinking and values, I guess, would be based in that ego world versus the other value system that applies in this outside world. And yeah. Okay, I'll get it, thank you.
It's awesome.
So
Real life.
So yeah, so two things. One, like
Chop wood, clean up Lily's poop.
pointing out that you sort of blew my mind on this premise, and it all makes sense based on what I think to be a fairly fair and low bias thought system that got me to the point where it all fits in with that, and then two, to sort of realize that to me, that is a superior model that somehow metaphorically or literally, I don't know, reflects an actual state of reality. And in order to exist, and that we should, if I will use that word, it is something to aim for our species that is worthwhile. And so in order to do that, then there would have to be some fundamental set of very very minimal list of rules or values or agreements that we would have to make in order for it to function. And I think that's probably what your book does, you know. So yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you're right though, and so and again, we're caught in language and words where you have to say something like you say, well, I feel that this perspective is like a superior perspective, and it's like, well, how else do you say that I think this is the way we should go as opposed to the other one?
And I think if you bounce it off enough people in the state of mind where they're open enough to the idea that you could, if you had this big focus group, you could get down to something like this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And so I think, that, again, because I'm not sure, when we've lost the audio in this, I'm not sure we really got this out. The idea that this has happened, this belief, the idea of the literal second coming,
right.
okay, has been around for 2,500 years. And the belief that that's going to happen and that's going to save everything it's not solving any of our problems. We still have all our problems. And if that happened, or just another way to think about that is like, so Jesus would come, and that idea is taking all the believers with him, and all the sinners are staying, or non-believers, whatever, are going to hell, or wherever they're going, whatever. Okay, so we've separated. Okay, so now this group is all there is. Well, if everybody today magically became a believer and accepted Christ, okay, that's going to solve all the problems, because like what you were saying is like just if like 5 minutes into it, like, oh, everybody just accepted Christ, we're here. Now what do we do?
Yeah.
Right? We're still here.
Yeah, totally.
We're still here right now. Now I know that it could be argued like, well, no, we're going to ascend bodily into heaven and blah, 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 all that. Okay, that hasn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that does. And the odds are against it.
Yeah, with
Heavily.
with 8 million
Okay.
people, at least
Yeah.
a couple of them are gonna like have second thoughts.
Yeah.
Or,
And
Have to poop.
it's not going to happen. And so we are here now. And so how do we have to be? So we have to stop thinking that we're the one that is right all the time and go, okay, how does everybody fit into this puzzle, right? And it's hard. I mean, it's super hard. It's not easy. And what I was saying too was then once you get to that point to understand that.
yeah, you're
that
not enlightened. It's not an endpoint.
Yeah, it's not an endpoint. You still have to practice on daily moment-to-moment basis. You're still going to fail sometimes where you don't behave the way you want
Sure.
to or need to, And then, and to your point, they're talking about like it's like a choice, and I talk about this in my book a lot. It's not a choice. Like I'm always going towards the truth.
Yeah, right.
Like if I know this
right.
is the divisive way, then it's why am I choosing? Why would I ever choose the divisive way if I can see that clearly?
Yeah,
Right?
there's
Okay.
the-
And it's hard to see that clearly, right? But that's why you have to reverse your thinking entirely, right? And so, again, like for me, a lot of the things were just simple. If I realized that what I was about to say was like my opinion or my preference or whatever, it was like, well, that's not it. That's not it. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm still here.
I'm still right. I'm still in my ego state of mind or whatever, and that's what's dominating my thinking. And so that's why I was talking about remove the labels, right? Because you take all the titles away because the people are not that. Now, I would use the term soul as to say what you truly are, and some people, of course, would have a natural resistance to that.
Yeah,
Some
yeah.
people would like that, but for lack of a better term, that you are something beneath that, and that soul is the individuation of the whole. Right? The whole is undeniable. Whatever you want to call the
Right.
whole, it's undeniable. It exists. The soul's the individuation, for a lack of a better term. You could call it the individuation.
Well, it's like a cell in an organism, right? It's
Yes.
just a level of organization that's
Yes.
different, smaller, a subset of.
Yes. And that's, the soul then is within that whole,
Yeah.
right? Okay? So you can't separate yourself out from that literally.
Right. It's like
In
it's
that
like the
time.
semi-permeable membrane on a cell. Yes, it's an individual as defined by the cell membrane, but in order to exist, it has to pass things back and forth through that.
Yeah. It's really
I mean, and so and this is another for me evidence. That model makes sense because it's true at a biological level, and in the grand scheme of things, everything is kind of the same at all. So why would that's the kind of model to me that's going to make more sense at some other spiritual level because it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the same premise. Like the dendritic nature of streams, blood vessels, lung tissue, tree roots, that's just something that works in nature. And so if you're pondering some great thing, maybe look at nature and go, well, what models worked out here? Let's try to apply this one. Oh, look, it fits.
Right, and that would be so the tree and the river, the tree and lungs, right? Same pattern,
Yeah.
right? That's what we're talking about
dendritic,
here.
yeah. Mhm.
And then the brain and the universe, right? When they can like distinguish it that way, and yeah, that's what's so interesting. And it's also interesting, literally, from like the tree and the importance of that tree.
Yeah, actually breathing.
To
oxygen.
breathing, and that's what's required,
Yeah,
right?
I know.
And that's what's so interesting. And see, the other thing that I find interesting about all this and this way of thinking, it's like, so in the Earth education programs that I was, experienced as a kid and then got to teach later as a student teacher and then went on to teach that further, is that program talks about these exact things just without the spiritual nature,
Yeah,
just
right.
without the spiritual terminology,
Sure.
right? And so Steve Van Meter, who is still the backbone of the Institute and started the Institute for Earth Education, he understood this. However, he came to all these understandings, and he presented it very much so in a physical, science-based
Right.
way, that this is the way we operate. But you could take almost all of his things, and I would actually say all of his major points, and just turn them into like the spiritual perspective
Yeah,
on
yeah.
it. It's the same thing, and that's where we're at. And all of that is going on constantly. And so I'm right here, I'm still always right here, where once I've had this thought, once I've had this experience, once I've had this view, if I say enlightenment, it sounds like I think I'm enlightened, which is the ego, right? See, the ego can't get enlightened because the ego, that's like a thing it did. Like, woo, I got enlightened, yeah!
It's not
Right?
in it's not the
Yeah.
purview.
And that's it. And the soul is already enlightened.
Yeah.
It is that,
Yeah.
right? So again, you can't get it because you already are it, right? And now you're here demonstrating it, right?
Yeah.
And now you're here demonstrating it, and that's what we have to do. And then, to your point, which you were saying, is why don't choose this direction then, the divisive
Right,
direction,
right.
the problematic the direction, whatever that is. And once you see that, I'm not going that direction. I'm going to go this direction. And this direction might go this direction. And it's not clear, but I'm always orienting myself towards the truth. And that's the best we can do.
Yeah, and like I said before, that's what doctors and lawyers mean when they say they practice, or
Right.
meditators, they practice, because it's maintaining a direction of life or spiritual
Sure.
path. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's mind blowing, because all of it, it's like I don't have many moments in life where everything makes sense, but everything sort of makes sense right now.
Right.
And what
Well,
gets
cool.
me about it is like there are indicators that let us know whether we're in the ego, and I don't have a lack of a better term, or in the unit of mind, or like the one big whole, whatever. And those things are real. They're I almost want to say you can't argue about it. And I think we all have those intuitions. We kind of know, like, wow, this, I don't know. I imagine people that are having affairs, at some point before they do it, they kind of go, they
like
think of their spouse and they go,
Well,
and they know in that moment what they're about to do is wrong.
yeah.
For whatever definition, or maybe they actually think it's not, and then that would just, to me, mean they're too far into their ego or whatever to understand that it's wrong. But there's some fundamental, universal, governing norms, rules, laws, whatever, that can direct us into this thing, and sort of, again, the evidence supports it in a scientific way. And I'm not advocating for a scientific approach to spirituality.
Sure.
But this evidence-based thing, when it's kind of Cartesian, when you've exhausted all potential biblical or whatever explanations of a phenomenon don't work, and you open the door to these other things, and now you exhaust those things, and you end up kind of always coming back from several different lines of thinking to this same conclusion.
You're right.
That to me is a valid line of reasoning,
Right.
and should be recognized as such.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I'm thinking that one thing that might be really cool, because we talked on these a couple times in this episode, is what if we went through stages of development, and I'll base it on Sean O'Leary's work, who talks about, I think he does 23 stages of development, and I think it's really important to look at those, because we sometimes, like, by not considering that there are stages of development past, say, education, or
right.
steps in a job, like
That's kind of we think about that being the end of it.
Yeah,
like I'm
right.
educated, I learned my job, I
yeah.
achieved the top.
And of course that's like part of even what a lot of people like end up having problems with, because they don't know what else to do. They go to, when you're in high school, you get to say I'm still in high school, and it's kind of like, oh, well, then everything's acceptable wherever you're at, because you're still a high school student, where you're at. But you're also developing other ways too, whether the school. So there's like those kind of things. So it would be like a hierarchy, like a structural hierarchy.
Or like a roadmap
for
being human.
Right.
Kind of thing.
And Right, and so sometimes like the structural hierarchy is necessary, but there's developments be outside of just the structural hierarchies,
Yeah.
right? That we do. So maybe we'll talk about those again. I would base it largely on Sean O'Leary, and it'll be interesting to see your experience because it'll be a lot of the parts where kids develop, and you've got this really nice subset to look right now because Ren is 6, right?
Yeah.
So she's gone through whatever 2 or 3 or 4 already,
right.
And then the other girls are in mid-teens to early 20s. Anybody in their 20, yeah, right. So they're in there, and they're getting, and then they're probably either just going in and out of even some of the developments.
Totally.
Like, this is my first love experience, and now I'm not in love,
And in some ways, they want to be 13 still and be like taken care of and have somebody wash their clothes. And I mean, not in a bad way. Just
sure.
We all want that to some
degree. Yeah.
And in other ways, they want to have.
Now I don't know if we get this on camera, but we have a special guest.
I pooped.
Did you go to the bathroom upstairs? You were not supposed to do that.
I think that's an excellent place to go next because I do find, I don't like the idea that there are rules, but I still think it's like a friend of mine said one time. I got so tired of them being on this label of research scientist, and I was in this other group of research scientists, and there was a rift between the two, and I'm like, why are you perpetuating this thing? And he's like, look, we need labels, otherwise we'd all be going, hey you, all the time. And so there has to be some, and I was like, all right, I accept that. We need some terms, and we need some rules, and we need some constraints about how these things are going to go, like this O'Leary, pathway, but that it should be minimal and open for discussion at the least.
Right. Yeah.
But there has to be some sort of rules. I mean.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Let's go that way next show.